I told him, I mean, that's basic Tanya. What you're describing is basic Tanya. Tanya says you have to distinguish between your emotions and your behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be prepared to accept the fact that on an emotional level, we've got a lot of garbage going on. I mean, the way he talks about it in Tanya is you have two souls. You have a godly soul, which only has a pure, holy drive, and you have an animal soul, which isn't evil, but in justifying its survival, it could do a lot of, unwholesome things. And so you have these two drives, and because you have these two drives, from that animal drive, they're going to surface all types of emotions, anger and lust and jealousy, and to be all bent out of shape. Oh no, I'm having these emotions. It's just not productive.
Yeah.
So the Alter Rebbe in Tanya says, acknowledge the emotion. Okay, that's what you have. It's your animal soul. It's your animal drive. Now use free choice. Choose a behavior that suits you better.
Hello, Rabbi Shais Taub. How are you doing today?
Hi, Baruch Hashem. I'm doing so well. Wow, good to finally be on the Zoom with you. We had some setbacks, but we made it. We're here.
We're here, and now is the best time.
Now is always the best time.
I'd love to get started. I'd love to hear a little bit about your background and what led into becoming, the rabbi you are today, and writing the couple of books that you've done, and the awesome Tanya map that you have. I'd love to start with
the Tanya map in the background, by the way.
Cool.
Some people hear it, they know what's a Tanya map. That color-coded thing back there.
Yeah.
Okay, so long story short, here's the 90-second biography. So my father, may he be well, is a psychologist. I grew up around that. I grew up around an awareness of helping people and trying to understand people and that kind of thing. And I rebelled and became a rabbi. So, but as much as I've never formally studied any of that stuff, and I make it very clear to people, my background is not in mental health. That's not how I was trained. My background is rabbinics. That is my formal training. But obviously, I'm very influenced by how I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always sort of gravitated toward the human insights that we find in Torah, especially in the Hasidic teachings, and what they teach us about how people work, and what makes us tick, and why we are the way that we are, and how we can best fit ourselves for maximum service and that kind of stuff. So that's what is interesting to me in my own life.
Yeah.
And then as an extension of that, I try to share it with others. If it works for them, great. I'll put it this way. It's not like I'm trying to offer any particular services to anybody. My interest in life is to learn as much as I can from the Torah and apply it to myself as best I can. And whatever insights I have that I think work for me, I like to share them with others. And if they work for you, they work for you. That's basically it. Okay, I think that was more than 90 seconds, but there you go.
How did you come across growing up? If your father was more in the mental health and psychology space, how did you first learn about the Torah, Judaism, and Hasidic sect that began to kind of answer your own personal questions?
So, growing up, it's interesting. I have a picture that my parents showed me of myself when I was 5 years old, and I had a little model Torah scroll that we got in synagogue on Simchas Torah. When you dance around with the Torah, you finish the Torah once a year, and so every kid got one of these little ones, and I had mine, and I don't remember it so well, except the picture reminds me that I built a little ark out of a tissue paper box, and I put it in my closet. And I took the little Torah scroll and I put it in the little tissue paper box in the closet. And I used to play, when I was like 4 or 5 years old, I used to play Rabbi. So looking back, even though if you would have asked
me, kids are playing, cowboys and Indians. But
yeah, or astronauts.
I I hadn't heard about playing rabbi.
Yeah. So if you would have asked me when I was, 15, are you going to be a rabbi when you grow up? I'd say, no, that's no way. And I also wouldn't say I'm going to be a psychologist like my father. I don't know what I would say. I don't know. But apparently, that was something that I was on the path for since I was a little kid. And I always grew up, with Judaic values in the home was always very, very important. I didn't see myself as doing it professionally or like whatever. It was like a given. Judaic values was like, Friday night you sit at the Shabbos dinner and what do you talk about? Politics and a little bit of Torah portion and like it was a given. It wasn't like something that I took seriously as like a field of scholarship. When I got older, I got turned on to Tanya, the book of Tanya. And I'm talking about like 20 years old. And I realized, wow, this stuff is really, complex and deep. This is serious stuff. And
was that the first time in which you first kind of got introduced to that stuff, or you were thinking about it, and then when you started learning about the Tanya, it kind of spoke to you in that, it's answering questions that you'd had before?
Well, like I said, I'd always been, kind of fascinated by what makes people tick.
Yeah.
And it's not just because my father's a psychologist, but I think also my whole life I've sort of, and I think other people can relate to this. Certain types of people can relate to this. My whole life I kind of felt, to a certain extent, like an observer. Like I didn't truly understand what is going on. So because of that, I had to become like a real student of life, like trying to figure it out. Like, what are these things that everyone else is just experiencing that I'm, I feel like I'm missing a piece, right?
Yeah.
So I always sort of like was trying to figure out, why are things the way they are? I guess you can call that philosophy. But I didn't call it anything. That was my. I didn't do it because it was interesting. I did it because that was like survival, like just trying to figure out why are things the way they are. Because I think I assumed that a lot of things were intuitive to people that were not intuitive, but then there were a lot of things that are intuitive that I was clueless about. So the combination of those two suppositions basically combined to me being like highly motivated to figure out a bunch of stuff that I was sure everybody else understood, but then I found out they didn't understand either.
Yeah, it reminds me, there's this great quote I heard the other day. It's like, like simple to you, amazing to others. It's stuff that we think, it's like, everybody knows that. But when you hear it, it's like, you never know how amazing it may be to someone.
I have this experience all the time. People call me up and like, I don't even want to answer them because like, what am I going to tell you? I have nothing to tell you. And then I tell them and they're like, wow, that was very insightful. And
Too humble.
Well, the only conclusion I can come to, no, I mean, obviously people value my perspective. So, but I've thought about that. Like, why is this perspective so amazing to them? And I realized, what all that it is? I said before, I don't see things the same way that most people see things. I'm not saying it's any better. I'm not saying I'm smart. I'm not saying I'm particularly insightful. I just think I have a different way of seeing things. So that when people hear it, they're like, oh, wow, that's new. So it may not necessarily be so profound, but it's new. It's got that going for it. So I realized that people enjoy hearing the way I look at things. And for me, it's just like, that's the way, of course, that's a normal thing. But for them, it's like, wow, that was a news flash. So whatever.
I'd love to even dive into a little bit of that. And as you brought up the Tanya, and the Tanya, for anybody that's not familiar, is kind of like not a rule book, but like a help guide for Jews, and it helps understand, the different ego and the godly soul and the animal soul, as it's called. But I first got into kind of meditation and practicing that, and that helped me break, different habits and get over different limiting beliefs. And then as I started learning the Tanya, I was like, oh wow, this is amazing. It's like a whole nother language, using the Alter Rebbe's language, that's explaining stuff that I already kind of understood. So I'd love to even dive into and how you cultivated, the certain perspective that you have, and we each have a unique perspective, but people appreciate yours. How did you begin to kind of actualize the stuff that you learn in the Tanya? Because the Alter Rebbe, so far, I'm in chapter 29, first time going through. He talks about meditation so far, and perhaps I just haven't read all the way through it, but is not explaining yet, what the process of in meditation, the technique to like what that is.
Wow. Okay. Wow. That's a lot there. That's a lot there. We just said. Okay. No, it's good. Okay. So first of all, I just want to agree to something that you said. You described Tanya as a language. I love that. Tanya is a language. Tanya is a way of understanding reality. Yeah. So, it doesn't surprise me at all that you say your experience was there were certain truths you were aware of already. And then when you saw them articulated in Tanya, you were taken with, how that truth was formulated or represented, but you were like, that's a truth I already know. So that doesn't surprise me at all that was your experience. I think all real truth is like that anyway, because I think we intuitively sense the truth. And the genius is in, how to give it the proper words.
Yeah.
So, and in fact, the Alter Rebbe himself doesn't even call himself the author of Tanya. He calls himself the compiler. He said, I just arranged it. I just arranged.
He says that in the introduction, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's right. I just put it. Look, I didn't grow the flowers. I'm the florist who makes the bouquet. That's it. He doesn't use that metaphor, but
yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. So you're asking about, how I got my view on Tanya. So I'll tell you something. It's similar to what I told you already about, I guess I have a different way of looking at things, and I'm not trying to be novel. I'm not trying to be out of the box. I really am not.
Yeah.
I studied Tanya. I mean, there are many, many commentaries on Tanya. The Lubavitcher Rebbe spoke many talks explaining Tanya. There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot to be studied. So I studied all that stuff. I'm not going to pretend I studied everything there is to be studied on Tanya, but I definitely spent thousands of hours, learning Tanya and commentaries and whatever I could get my hands on.
Yeah.
And then at the end, I just reported what I found. And people reacted to it like, oh, wow, that's so novel. Well, first of all, I hope I'm not being novel, because, I just said a few minutes ago that real truth is old.
What I think you're mainly doing is just showing familiar places in new ways.
And to speak about language, I think all that I've done is I might have a different language for talking about these ideas, and that's what people are. Sometimes you talk about an idea and people are burnt out on words, certain words, like today in political discourse, for instance. I'll just use that as an example, because things are so polarized. You can't have an intelligent discussion of issues of policy today. And most of it is because people are burnt out on the words. So by the time you use a word, a term, and that term already is so loaded, and it is so emotionally triggering.
Yeah.
There's no way to have an intelligent discussion about it. But imagine all of a sudden you have a discussion about the same policy issues, and you don't use any of the words that the pundits use. You don't use any of the talking points. You're talking about the same idea, but you use a completely different set of words for it. And now all of a sudden people feel, oh, wow, this is new. No, actually, it's not new. It's the same thing you were already tired of hearing about, but we took a side door into your brain by using new language.
Yeah.
So I think that's all I did for Tanya is I re-articulated some ideas in a.
I'd love to dive into that, because how did you really kind of actualize it? And I mean, in like I brought up with the meditation, because in the practice of meditation, I can kind of get into a state of letting go, where my brain, because I'm out of the way, begins to make connections on its own. And so when I talk to different kind of fellow individuals my own age, or even older, and like you were sharing, it's not about having a better perspective or anything. It's just about, how do you help somebody personalize the information that's in the Tanya? Or or like we also said, it's in a language. So now we have science as a language that's beginning to explain what's going on with transformation, with meditation, with breaking a habit, whatever.
It's interesting. Last week I had a conversation with Tal Ben Shachar, who is the professor at Harvard who gave the class on happiness. Well, I think the most popular class at Harvard. And he wrote a number of best-selling books on happiness. And he comes at it from a psychological perspective and a neurological perspective. And obviously that's not my background. I'm coming at it from a spiritual perspective. And we found so much common ground in our conversation. We found so many things that both of us were saying and nodding our heads and saying, yeah, that's right. That's right. Oh yeah, you say that too, right? And the only difference was language, right? Like we were saying the same ideas, we just had different words or examples for bringing them out. But since you're asking about making Tanya practical, I'll give you an example of something, something that we spoke about. Is that like regifting if you use a previous podcast to fill up content on another podcast? If I tell you what I spoke about with him on his podcast, on your podcast, is that like, okay, anyways. I'm just being spontaneous is what I thought of. I won't filter. Okay. Anyways, a podcast about podcasts. Anyway, so I'll tell you one of the interesting things we discussed. He said that one of the keys to happiness is accepting your nature, and that part of human nature is that we have emotions that we're not necessarily so proud of, but you have to first accept them.
Yeah.
And then after you've accepted them, you can make behavioral choices even in spite of them. But if you're busy being so appalled with yourself, why am I having this emotion? Then you don't even get to the point where you can make a behavioral choice that is higher than that emotion. So I told him, that's basic Tanya. What you're describing is basic Tanya. Tanya says you have to distinguish between your emotions and your behaviors. And you have to be prepared to accept the fact that on an emotional level, we've got a lot of garbage going on. The way he talks about it in Tanya is you have two souls. You have a godly soul, which only has a pure, holy drive, and you have an animal soul, which isn't evil, but in justifying its survival, it could do a lot of, unwholesome things. And so you have these two drives, and because you have these two drives, from that animal drive, they're going to surface all types of emotions, anger and lust and jealousy, and to be all bent out of shape. Oh no, I'm having these emotions. It's just not productive.
Yeah.
So the Alter Rebbe in Tanya says, acknowledge the emotion. Okay, that's what you have. It's your animal soul. It's your animal drive. Now use free choice. Choose a behavior that suits you better.
Yeah. So the reason why I wanted to talk a lot about meditation, though, is
Okay.
and then also even introducing a little bit about the like topic of like addiction and breaking habits is someone first has to begin to have that awareness of what this certain to differentiate the two voices, because sometimes, at least at first, it doesn't even, nobody recognizes that there's a pause between thinking. They're just constantly thinking. You know, I often hear, you know, being a meditation and mindfulness / health coach, you know, somebody often says, I just can't turn off my brain. So that I'm really interested in is, so far I've learned with the Tanya, he references that meditation and then that process, like you were just talking about, you know, acknowledging it, choosing otherwise, but there's still seems the missing step of, first of all, noticing, you know, what is the animal drive or not.
Right. Okay. So I'll tell you something interesting about the Tanya view, and let's see if this resonates with the truth as you already understand it. The Alter Rebbe classifies thought as a behavior. There's impulse for thought, right? Where you think of something, which we can't really control, right? We can't control it, even if we try to. Like, don't think of an elephant on roller skates. Right? You lost. We can't control what we think of, but we can control what we think about. We can control what we think about.
When you say think of, meaning like
what pops in your head
arises.
Yeah, it just arises, and there's really no way to. And we have intrusive thoughts all the time. There's nothing dysfunctional about intrusive thoughts. The dysfunction is when a person becomes obsessed with the fact that the thoughts are intrusive, right? So, you know, a person drives down the highway. Of course, it pops in your head. What would happen if I turn the wheel and go flying off the side of the road? Right? That kind of thought pops into your head. Oh, don't get all normal on me. I'm sure you've had that thought, right? Or you're standing, you know, you're standing on in an office building in a high window, and you're like, what would happen if I jumped out? Now, it's not suicidal ideation. It's not like you're actually looking to jump out. You're just thinking, what would happen if I jump out, right? Okay, all right.
No, I did a 10-day meditation, silent meditation retreat, so I definitely had a bunch of thoughts like that are
right. Okay. Right. So crazy things pop in our head all the time. And now sometimes those things are just plain silly. Other times they're immoral or unwholesome. And I'm going to use the term immoral, although, you know, that my understanding of morality may be different from listeners. And I'm asking them not to get hung up on that, because I'm not saying that in a judgmental way. I'm saying it purely in an informative way. Okay, so I don't want to get into a discussion about what you consider to be immoral or not, but let's say a thought that you consider to be immoral, all right? Whatever it is, throwing your grandmother down the stairs, you know, I would assume that we would all agree. Although I don't want to judge, you know, maybe that's what you're into. Anyways, let's say a thought pops up that you find immoral. So the question is, you know, what do you do about that? So the answer is, what do you do about it? Do nothing. You don't choose what pops up in your brain. Now, once it pops up in your brain, you can choose whether or not to meditate on it. You're going to say, meditate? I don't meditate. I'm not sitting on the floor humming. Or meditation happens all the time. You're sitting in the car and you don't even realize what street signs you're seeing because you're thinking about what's going to happen at the meeting that you're driving to. That's called meditation. Meditation is any focused thought. Now, there are different ways of meditating, but I think we do ourselves a disservice when we only define meditation as a very specific meditative practice. I think meditation is any type of focused thinking, and not even productive focused thinking, because I think it's important to realize that we have a lot of meditations we do that are destructive.
Just like letting the mind wander.
Or wandering until you find a nice juicy resentment, and then focusing on that resentment until you're so mad that you could kill. Now, the person that you could kill, you haven't seen them in 10 years, right? But you're focused so much on the memory of the injustice and of the hurt that your experience of it is so vivid, right, that you're having a physiological reaction.
Yeah.
And that's a meditation. That's a very
the
powerful
the
meditation.
body doesn't know the difference between
The
thought.
body doesn't know the difference, right? And that's a powerful meditation. So you're meditating already. We're all meditating already. The question becomes, what are we going to choose to meditate on? So this comes back to the point of, I can't choose what I think of, but I can choose what I think about.
Okay.
And even after I've chosen what to think about, let's say I want to think about something healing. I want to think about how everything in the universe is connected and it's all one and there's nothing meaningless. Everything has meaning and everything is significant, and the infinity of the universe doesn't just mean that nothing is too big for the universe. It means also nothing is too small for the universe, and there's nothing meaningless. Let's say that's my meditation, right? And that's what I choose to think about. While I'm thinking about that, I may be interrupted repeatedly by things I want to think of.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. I like
And I let that roll by, and I can go back to the thing I want to think about. And just like that resentment meditation, where it actually ended up affecting me viscerally, I can meditate myself through a wholesome meditation, also into having a physiological effect. I can meditate myself into a relaxed state, just as well as I can meditate myself into a state of stress.
Mm-hmm. It definitely seems, I like the way you explained it. It's like another way of seeing meditation or explaining meditation. It definitely seems like it's more of just, it's a tool to help build the awareness of that we have the ability of controlling what we think about, not of the thoughts that come into the head.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of, kind of to transition a little bit, as you write in the book, and then I also have been reading this short book about Maimonides, he says, there's, it doesn't matter where truth comes from, so long as it's truth. And science is like, there's this great doctor and author I listen to and follow his meditations, and he uses science as a language to honestly explain a lot of what the Tanya is doing and explain what goes on meditation and how to break habits and let go of different beliefs and change perspectives and all that goes into that. However, one thing that stuck out to me in my own journey and reading your book a little bit is wisdom compared with Torah. Could you could you kind of dive a little further into that? And like, it's very fascinating to me, kind of putting my thoughts together. But other religions or backgrounds, I hesitate saying religion because I don't really think Judaism is a religion, although it's.
I agree with you. I agree that Judaism is not a religion. Yeah.
But anyways, other.
But I can't say that because people misunderstand it.
Yeah.
So pretend we didn't say it.
Yeah. But still, like when I would go to a meditation retreat, other, you have conversations with other individuals, and they have their own teachers who were, relatively similar to Moses in that they channeled a high book about, whatever, higher worlds, and it's this reality. But the Torah is what's not a book, it's 5 books, it's the whole scroll. Can you touch on wisdom compared with Torah wisdom? And why it is different than like wisdom we may hear and learn about from other cultures or backgrounds?
Sure. Okay. So I guess the first thing I would say is that there's an easy way of answering this question. There's a hard way. So I'm going to start with the easy way. And I'm acknowledging that I'm taking the easy way and that I'm not doing this is not a tactic where I'm trying to, squirm out of the question. I'm being transparent about it. The easy way is to say, well, I don't have to answer the claim whether or not Judaism or Torah is unique. I can choose to take your question as, does it have a unique role for Jews? That's how I could choose to take the question, that and turn it into a more softball question. And the answer would be that if you are Jewish, which means not just that you have an affinity for Jewish ideology, because there are plenty of Jews who don't even like Jewish ideology. They don't practice Judaism, they don't like Judaism, right? But if you have a Jewish soul, then your soul is going to be compatible with a Jewish spiritual path. So the softball answer to the question is, you know what? It doesn't matter what's to be found in other faith traditions. If you're Jewish, go to your faith tradition. And if you're not finding it compelling, it's probably that it hasn't been presented properly to you. And with the advent of the internet, when I was your age, I sound really old now, when I was your age, but the world has changed so fast that I can actually say, when I was your age, if you wanted to become educated about Judaism, it was not that easy. Like, you'd have to get up and go somewhere, maybe get on a plane, right? And today, you just go online and you can learn anything you want and become pretty educated. Now, you could also get a lot of misinformation and disinformation, so you have to be careful. But yeah, I would say if you're Jewish, educate yourself about your faith tradition, because Torah is going to have something that you will not find anywhere else for you. Yeah. For you. That's the softball question, the softball version of the question.
No, it's definitely helpful, and I've spoken to some other individuals, whether it be on the podcast or not, and then it's also like they went, to a different tradition to learn meditation, but sooner or later something led them back to their Jewish tradition. So it definitely shines light on how there's some uniqueness to not just the Jewish soul, but all of our souls. Well, one of my biggest questions I had internally over the past, I don't know how long, maybe coronavirus time, was, what really makes everybody unique. And, growing up Jewish, there was that unique feeling. But I was trying to understand, how is it unique than other kind of backgrounds? Then the more and more I practiced meditation and also spoke with different individuals, there seemed to be a lot of correlation and similarity in experience with other fellow Jews that non-Jews weren't having.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's possible. Although I personally, I tend to shy away from trying to make the unique Jewish experience something that's social, meaning, to verify the Jewishness of my experience by checking in with what other Jews are experiencing. And I'll tell you why. Because once we head down that path, so then basically we've reduced this truth to something that's a cultural construct. And my claim that I'm making is a much bigger claim. I'm saying that even a Jew who had no exposure to Judaism, and therefore would have no reason to have any affinity to Judaism, will find that the Jewish path is uniquely compatible with their growth.
Interesting. Okay. there's one thing in I wanted to touch on about a little bit about addiction and from God of Understanding. And I heard you talk about on the Great Day podcast I think many months ago, but you mentioned something that really stuck out in how somebody could be using holy kind of objects or holy things as also an addiction.
Yeah, I remember saying that.
And it resonated a lot because I felt myself as well. Sometimes maybe I was treating, putting on tefillin or praying or Shabbat in that way. And when I actually stepped back from it and changed the approach, then the whole thing kind of changed. So could you talk a little bit about, differentiating that and differentiating, an observant life and following the different kind of customs and whatever with insulation?
Yeah. So first of all, let me give a little context to the listeners about, you paraphrased something that I said. I just want people to understand the context in which I said it.
Thank you.
I was, someone asked me about addiction, like what can you become addicted to? I said anything. And then I think to make my point, I said you could take good things, beautiful things, holy things, and you could misappropriate those and turn them into addiction. And I said, addiction isn't about what, it's about why. What are you trying to get out of this thing? How are you using it? What's your purpose? So I said, something that you're using as an escape to avoid reality, doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's a drug. It doesn't matter if it's a behavior. That's what makes it an addiction. At least, again, I'm not here purporting to be giving anyone else's definition other than my own. Okay, this is so. I said, and so to make a point, I said, look, people could take Torah study and they can turn that into an addiction. And that's not good. And I don't mean that in a good way. That's actually a terrible thing. It's a misappropriation of Torah study to turn it into your escape. Yeah. So just to speak a little bit more about that. Look, let me just speak anecdotally. I don't know what the numbers are. I'm not even interested in the numbers. This is what I see to be true. We see all the time that people use religion in an unhealthy way. I mean, that's a fact. Now I know there are those who will argue that intrinsically all religion is unhealthy, and obviously I don't believe that. As a religious person, I don't believe that. But I definitely believe that religion can be misused, and let's talk about one of the most common misuses, which is turning religion into another form of self-medication. I can't handle life, so I'm distracting myself through these beliefs, these rituals, right? I always look at it like this. I say, look, Torah, I'm not going to speak for other religions because frankly, I'm not interested. I don't owe any other ideology any allegiance to be its spokesperson, and I don't think they'd want me as their spokesperson. So I'll just say about Torah. God gave us the Torah as guidance how to live in his world. If you're using it for anything else than living in this world, there's something fundamentally wrong. So if you're using it to get a feeling, that's not what it's for. If you're using it even to incur divine favor, to make God like you, if that's what you think doing mitzvahs does. That's also not what it's for. Torah is so that we can live in this world. That's why Torah was given to souls in bodies down here in this world. In fact, that's why souls came to this world. So if it's not putting you into life, if it's not causing you to feel what's going on around you and be able to respond to what's happening in the world around you and to be able to connect with the people around you, then it's a fundamental misuse of the entire purpose for which Torah was given.
Thank you. All right, Rabbi, I know we're cutting short a little on time given our late start, but
yeah.
Thank you for all that we've covered today. It maybe didn't have the most structure as far as hitting certain topics, but I really appreciate how we covered a lot about the Tanya and meditation and just being able to become familiar with oneself and to make sure that we're approaching life and the things that we engage in life in a wholesome way. To conclude, I'd love to hear a little bit about, I first got introduced to you, not speaking wise, but hearing you talk at the CYJP Shabbaton a year ago, which was a lot of fun. And then recently I finished listening to your series on the essence of Hasidus, which was great. So thank you for doing that. Could you touch on, just to give our listeners, what you're doing with Soul Words and the different series you have on there, and where people can learn more about you and what you're doing?
Oh, wow. Thank you. Okay. So I'm glad you mentioned Soul Words. Soul Words is the name of my website, soulwords.org, but it's basically that's how I define my job as well. Remember, this is how we started off talking. We were saying language, right? It's all about language. So soul means, the abstract, the ideas. Words are the containers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a word is by definition something that defines. But when you define something, you limit it. But by limiting it, you release it. And if you refuse to limit the idea, so it means everything, then it means nothing. So Soul Words is basically that nexus between the ethereal idea and the articulation, choosing a way of saying it. And once I've chosen one way of saying it, I've neglected all the other ways I could have said it.
Yeah.
And that's self-limiting. But the self-limitation is itself, self-expressive. That's the irony of it. So that's what Soul Words is about. And basically, I take all my different content that I'm putting out there. There's lots of different types of content. There's text-based Torah study, like you were talking about on the essence of Chassidus, or Tanya, or I have Shara B'tochen, which is a medieval treatise on trust in God. And then I have all types of other things, like we had a webinar a few weeks ago about how to answer people's questions. It was a 2-part webinar, and we just talked about what do you do when somebody comes to you and they're confused, and how do you help talk somebody to a point of clarity? Okay, so I have stuff like that. You go check it out. I mean, it's pretty well organized as far as the styles of classes. There's everything there that I'm interested. Basically, what it is, it's one guy, me, and all the stuff that I find interesting, and just thrown out there, but organized. So when you figure out what kind of stuff that I like, you also like, you'll be able to find it. That's what it is.
Yeah. Awesome. I like I like the explanation of Soul Words. It didn't click yet that, and like it was just talked about in one of the, there's a whole discourse on from the Parsha of Beshalach when the Jews went through the parting of the sea, and how we say pretty much every day the words are kind of like a horse, in that it's a limitation, but it can also take you further and faster than if you didn't have the words. That's so cool. Awesome. Well, Rabbi, again, it's such a pleasure to connect with you, to connect with all the information that you're putting through the medium of technology, and getting the fortunate opportunity of hearing you last year before the coronavirus started in New York. So thank you many blessings and success as you continue, and God willing, I hope to meet you in person and spend a Shabbat or something.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, fine. Let's keep in touch.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay, be well. Bye-bye.